So let's look at what might have been the next evolutionary step in conflict resolution, and that would have been loving confrontation, so-called. Okay? So what happens in this model is that now the wife, rather than getting angry, she looks at the husband and she says, you know, can I confront you? You've got some issues here that you need to look at. You're very controlling and you're very critical. You know, you have this tendency to blame other people and to belittle them and to make them feel lesser than, and I don't like that. And you need to do something about that. Well, what's wrong with that? Or maybe you don't think that was loving enough. Maybe she says all of that a little more nicely. Honey, you know, I really think that you've got this thing about being critical with people, and you don't realize it, but you know, you really are putting me down and making me feel like I'm inadequate and so forth. Okay, so there could be more of an emphasis on the loving piece of that. All right. So the reason this isn't going to work, there's two reasons. Okay. First of all, at least as I've presented it, where are the wife's issues in that? Okay. They've disappeared. The only thing that's on the table is the wife's perception or interpretation of husband's issues. Okay? So the whole thing is framed in an unbalanced way. Okay? It's all being, she's obviously upset. So if she's upset, she's disharmonious. That means there's something about her that's going on. But she's not presenting this as being something that is about her and about him. By turning it into loving confrontation, she's kind of pointing the arrow at him and saying, you know, hubby, I think you've got some stuff you need to work on. Now, what's probably going to happen with hubby in this case is that he's probably not going to receive this all that well. Why? Because she's missed the part about him and his sense of need and his sense of lack and his need for comfort. Okay, that's what's really alive for him in the way that he behaved. He was really kind of trying to get the universe to change, and maybe she could change as kind of a representative or an agent of the universe and help him to feel better. But he didn't think that it was her responsibility to put the tape measure in place. Okay? So when she focuses on that and on it being about his tendency to be critical, he's going to say, no, that's not what this was at all. Unless he just submits to her completely. Unless he takes that on and says, oh, gee, maybe I am really critical, and maybe he, you know, if he kind of wears her perspective. But then they have another kind of problem, okay, which is that he can't really maintain his own sense of self, and he can't be in touch with his own self, and he's dependent on her to define him, and that's not going anywhere, okay? So either we have that, the submission, or we have, he's going to come back with resistance and say, no, you're missing the point. Now, how's she going to interpret that? She's going to say, honey, come on now, you know, yeah, you just don't want to look at this. This is something you really need to look at. I can sense you've got resistance. And then he might come back with, you know what, you're being really condescending. That's not what this is about at all for me. Off they go. Good chance that the same thing is going to happen. There's going to be more clashing. There's not going to be meshing, because her thing, her vulnerability about being criticized is really in the background, and and she's kind of defined his issue in terms of the impact that it has on her. Okay, so she's put her stuff kind of onto him, and now he's fighting that off or he's submitting to it. Either way, we've got problems. Okay, so the dump doesn't work. The loving confrontation probably doesn't work either. Now that may be a bitter pill because in Pathwork circles, at least the ones I've traveled in, I've heard this phrase a million times. I haven't seen very much of it in actual practice, but I've heard it many, many, many times. And so I went back and I tried to find where confrontation was in the lectures and so forth. And I might have missed some things, but the only place I was really able to find it was in the supplementary materials where I think it might be in the one called The Message. I'm not 100% sure. Where the guide said something along the lines of, let me suggest to you that when you get together in your working groups, you should, if there is somebody who thinks that they don't really have work to do, and it's clear that they do, that maybe the other members of the group could confront them and could help them to see that. So let's look at that and let's ask ourselves, is that description, okay, we're talking now about a circle of individuals who have come together to do work and who maybe go around and describe, where they think they're at and what their growth edge might be, and then somebody says, "Gee, I think I think you might be avoiding something. Could I talk to you a little bit about what I think I'm seeing?" If you look at that, which is what I hear when I hear, or what I read when I read that thing that the guide said about getting together in groups, I'm not seeing a conflict resolution model. I don't think that loving confrontation is being presented, at least there, as a loving confrontation model. I think it's being presented as a way to avoid stagnation in groups. One of the things that can go wrong in groups, there are basically two ways that groups fall apart. Okay, one way is that people don't resolve their conflicts. They sit there, they hold stuff for a long time with each other, and finally somebody blows, and the whole thing, blows up, and there isn't. The container can't handle that, and people stomp off in their different directions. Or the other way that groups fall apart is that everybody's very, very nice to each other and very mutually supportive, and keeps giving each other real positive feedback about where they're at and how good their work is and all that kind of thing. And as a result, people stagnate because there are some elephants on the table that everybody's ignoring for the sake of harmony. Okay? So I think that the guide was giving us loving confrontation as a vehicle to kind of jazz up and shake up that group. And it may be that the guide was seeing something right then and there that the guide was responding to and saying, it might be a good idea if you kind of prodded each other a little bit, because you're getting a little too much like a mutual admiration society, and it's slowing down your work. All right, so I could be wrong about that, but that's my impression, is that somehow loving confrontation has gotten categorized as a subset of conflict resolution when really it wasn't meant to be, and it doesn't tend to work for the reasons that I've just described. Okay, so that takes care of the dump, and that takes care of loving confrontation. So let's move on to what looks like to me like it might be the dominant method now, at least in the community with which I'm most familiar. And